This video is about the UK economy and globalisation, which is Unit 3 of the OCR Economics GCSE. This unit is split into 7 sections, the first of which is about why countries trade. Globalisation is the expansion of world trade in goods and services, which leads to a greater international interdependence. International interdependence is when countries rely on each other for goods and services, and everyone's being all reliant, and it's like a big happy family that's not very happy. And it leads to an increase in outsourcing and large sums of money being transferred from one country to another because people are exporting and importing all the time, so they're buying and selling across borders. This is a really basic history of globalisation. I'm not really sure if you need to know this, but it's just nice to know where we are in the world and stuff. So there was 3 main stages, the first of which was in 1870, which was the increase in international trade, because new technology helped to improve transport, because people could ship their goods from country to country, and this cost less, so more people did it, so it's more importing and exporting and trade. But this ended in the 1920s because countries decided to try to protect their home industries against foreign competition, so they reduced their imports so that their own industries could grow, and that's called sort of infant industry protection. And in 1945, the end of the Second World War, countries were keen to rebuild economies and be friends with other countries after the big war, and this led to a rapid expansion in world trade. And the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were founded to sort of deal with trade between countries, and this also promoted trade and economic cooperation, so everyone was all happy again. And stage 3 started, a few years ago, quite recently, a few decades, I don't know, now, and it's an increase in trade and capital flows between countries, and also the growth of huge companies called MNCs, which we'll learn about in a bit. There's many reasons for the growth in globalisation, the first of which is improvements in transportation. This is because the cost of transporting goods has decreased, for example due to containerisation, which is the increased efficiency of transporting goods in large shipping crates and boxes and planes and whatever. And this means that goods can be traded competitively worldwide because they can be transferred much faster, so everyone can get access to them because we just fly them out to loads of countries. Then there's improvements to ICT, and because communications are much faster and cheaper, payments can be sent between countries immediately at low cost. So you can buy and sell really quickly across borders, and people can also promote their products via the internet to reach a much larger market, and this increases world trade. The global rising living standards has led to an increase in consumer demand for a wider variety of goods and services in rich countries. So that's stimulated world trade because we can now get, stuff from Brazil, like fabric in Brazil, I don't know what they make in Brazil, that we can't get from other countries. So we're demanding it from there so they can increase their trade with us, and then we're increasing the trade everywhere. And there's also been a great decline in protectionism, so countries encourage trade, so there's fewer barriers to trading, so no import taxes and stuff like that in some cases, but you might have them for some reasons, not for others. And finally there's economies of scale, and technological improvements mean that companies can mass produce and sell to much more to a larger market, so they sell overseas and produce overseas to get cheaper production costs and to reach the larger market to make more profit. Multinational companies, otherwise known as MNCs, are companies that operate worldwide with a headquarters in one country, and they've had a massive boom recently, and they now account for 20% of production in the global economy and 50% of the world's imports. And this is really scary for some economists. It's really exciting for some economists, and most people just don't care. And some MNCs have incomes that are larger than the GDPs of some countries. Wow. There's many advantages to a company of being an MNC. For example, they gain a strong foothold in the international market if they're selling worldwide and operating worldwide, which means they've got a much greater audience, so they can sell much more, get much more profit. They can also take advantage of cheap labour costs in other countries if they're operating worldwide. So they might export loads of people to places like India, where their production will be much cheaper because they don't have to pay as much. And they can also take advantage of different strengths of many countries, for example, cheap labour again, and the availability of raw materials in countries that have got loads of forests and stuff like that. Then you can take advantage of transport and distribution costs, because if you've got plants worldwide, then transport of countries worldwide should be cheaper. For example, if you've got a factory based in India and you're selling to Indians, then you only have to transport it by lorry or something rather than by plane. But if you had your only factory in India and you were selling to English people, you would have to fly it all over. And you can also get a favourable tax environment in some countries. So countries that have got lower taxes and tax breaks are more attractive to locate in, so you can produce cheaper and you don't have to give as much away to the government. And you can also get government grants. Isn't that exciting? Because governments might offer a grant to a company to set up a factory in an area of high employment, because it's great for everyone, because they get the employment and you get some money off a factory. Woo! But there's also some disadvantages of MNC coming and setting up in your country. For example, you could have loss of jobs, because you might be like, yeah, loads of employment because we've got this MNC, but then they might relocate and then you'll lose all these jobs, and that would just be really unfortunate. Countries might also lose out on tax revenue from the MNC and its workers, because most profit will return to the parent country and not benefit the countries where the MNC is actually operating. So say, I don't know, they set up a factory in Bradford and everyone in Bradford was like, yeah, we can get loads of money, but then all the profits from the Bradford factory go back to the original country where they were making it, I don't know, say Russia, so we actually lose out on all that tax, which is pretty sad and depressing. And countries might also become dependent on imports because they're vulnerable to closures, because companies might prefer to close a factory abroad than at home. So, say Japan had a factory in Japan and a factory in Madagascar, and they realised that they were costing too much to run, they had to close one, they're much more likely to close the factory in Madagascar than the one in Japan. So you're sort of relying on the MNC a bit too much. And you also suffer the risk of the MNC moving and taking away all the technology involved in the production, so you lose all these amazing machines, which is just sad. But it's not all bad news, because countries can gain from having MNCs, because they bring new technology to increase their production and stuff, and you might be able to learn from that, like, oh, I like that new technology, I'm going to make it myself, and then you might make it yourself. And you might also create jobs, because they're coming here, they'll need workers, so that reduces unemployment in the country. And they also promote economic growth, because the country's output is increasing. Yay! When we're thinking of worldwide trade, we might think about international specialisation. We might not, but we are in this case. And specialisation is when a country is better than another at producing a good or service in terms of quantity of output and lower cost. For example, France, I think it's France, specialises in wine. I don't think France does actually, but say France did specialise in wine, they can produce wine cheaper and make more because they've got all these vineyards, whereas we don't have very good growing conditions, so we can't make wine very well. So they specialise in wine and we might specialise in the financial sector. And absolute advantage is when a country is able to provide a good or service using fewer resources and at a lower cost than another. So France has absolute advantage of vineyards over us. How sad. And international trade is the exchange of goods and services across international boundaries. And this has many advantages and disadvantages, as we're going to see in a second. A major benefit of international trade is that individuals and firms can obtain goods that aren't available in their country. For example, a country abroad might be able to produce chilies. Maybe we can't grow chilies here, so why should we have to suffer and not have chilies in our curries? And due to international trade, we can have chilies in our curries, so we don't have to suffer. I don't really like chilies at all. It also increases choice for consumers because we're obtaining goods that aren't available in our country. We've got all these goods from all these different countries, so we've got loads of choice, which is really happy. And because other countries might have got absolute advantage and stuff like that, they might be able to produce goods cheaper, so they can sell them cheaper, so we can spend less. And it also increases competition, which prevents monopolies, which, as we learnt in Unit 1, have many disadvantages. And firms can also gain economies of scale because they're selling to a much wider range. They have to produce more and they get many benefits of producing more, and that increases their sales and profits and reduces the price for consumers, hopefully. It also reduces the firm's reliance on domestic markets, otherwise known as home markets, because they're selling to many more countries. So say there was a problem in our country, they've still got all the other countries they can sell to. And it also increases world output, which is just yay. Unfortunately, international trade also has many negative externalities, and guess what? They're all to do with the environment. So we have pollution from the dirty industries, cheeky, because some foreign countries have got lower environmental standards than other countries, which makes them an attractive, cheaper alternative to firms. So say, I don't know, I don't want to offend any country, so I'll just make one up. Paperland has got really bad environmental qualities, and they've got no laws regarding the environment and stuff, so their factories are free just to pollute how they want. a factory and firm from over here might think, oh, let's go over there because then we can produce cheaper because we've not got any of these regulations. So we go over there and loads more pollution is emitted, which is really bad, leads to all these problems. And then we also have air miles, because everyone's trading and sending stuff worldwide. Many items are flown into countries from abroad, which contributes to global warming, which leads to many more issues. And there's also transport of the finished good, and parts of the good releases pollution. So say we've got 5 different factories, each producing part of the good, and then they all come together to make the final good. We have lots of transportation between the factories, especially if they're in different countries. So you might have one factory in China and one in Brazil, and you have to fly all the stuff from country to country, and that's just really bad for the environment. International trade leads to global interdependence, which when countries rely on each other, and this can be really good and lead to greater economic growth when economies are doing well, and this is loads of employment, yay. But if there's problems in some countries, recessions can spread really fast. For example, a fall in demand for a product in one country leads to unemployment in the country which exports it, which leads to a horrible negative multiplier effect, downward spiral, everyone's losing jobs worldwide, which is really horrible. Free trade is basically a lack of protectionism, which means there's no tariffs, quotas and regulations which are designed to reduce or prevent trade among nations, and this means that the original producer can gain a larger proportion of the value of the products, so it's fair trade, which is yay. So there's many benefits of free trade. For example, there's more choice of goods at a lower possible price because goods are made where it's efficient to do so it's cheaper to make them, so you can buy more with your money. And there's increased competition, so it encourages firms to innovate, which means you get a wider variety of products, better quality of products, and increased productivity, so that's lower cost again, and therefore lower price. There's also increased economic growth and employment because there's increased exports and therefore increased output and stuff. It also encourages efficiency because everyone's competing with each other. They're like, oh, we want to make our goods at a lower price than yours, so they have to be more efficient, which is really good for the environment, hopefully. And it also increases world output and wealth. For example, Qatar's rich in oil, but without trade, this would be little benefit to them. They'll be like, oh, we have all this oil, but we have nothing to do with it. But now, because there's loads of countries demanding this oil, Qatar's got something they can do. Sell it. The World Trade Organization are basically a big organisation which is responsible for increasing free trade so that everyone gets all the advantages discussed earlier, settling dispute between member countries and providing a set of rules which all the member countries have to obey, and making rules supporting trade barriers to protect consumers, for example, to prevent the spread of disease. The World Trade Organization currently has 159 member countries, so loads of people are in it. It's the thing to be in. And negotiations to come up with rules take many years, and each set of negotiations is called a round, and the place of each round is different, and the current round is the Doha round, or however you pronounce it. So we're moving on now to patterns of trade, and the 2 most important things we need for trade are imports and exports. Imports are goods and services provided by firms based overseas to UK residents, so money leaves the UK, and money spread abroad, except with English countries, or with a foreign country is also an import because it results in money going, so bye-bye money. However, exports are really exciting, yay, because goods and services provided by UK firms and sold to non-resident people and firms result in money entering the UK, so we're like, yeah, money, rich, wealth, hopefully. Trading goods is worth much more and it's more important than trade in services, and trade in manufactured goods and commercial services dominate the sector. And trade in exports and imports grew more quickly than GDP from 2000 to 2007. The UK does most of its trade with members of the EU and the USA, as well as China, and in the past it traded more with the Empire and the Commonwealth. In 1955, the UK mainly exported manufactured goods and imported other goods because we had all these factories. We were like, yeah, we're so cool, we're exporting manufactured goods. But now we mainly import these manufactured goods, and what we do most of our trade with is investment, so we're all about finance here in the UK, yeah. China and India have grown dramatically recently, both in terms of population and economic growth, and the UK has traded with these countries for centuries, so we're like old mates. And in the past their impact on the UK economy was quite minimal, but their rapid growth had a major effect on our manufacturing industry and trade, so we're manufacturing much less now thanks to them. Both of those countries export loads, but they also got quite a big demand for imports, which has a massive impact worldwide, because loads of countries are buying what they're selling and trying to produce what they want, but we're not sure whether this is going to last or not. But recently, China's trade has increased by 7-fold, which is like, wow, and India's by 3.5, which looks kind of pathetic in comparison, but compared to us, I mean, we've probably gone downhill knowing us. China's doing better than India because it's able to attract foreign direct investment better because it's got less poverty problems, which tend to put people off investing in them. And they're also going to try to move on from manufacturing goods because otherwise cheaper producers will appear and China will lose out to them. But India's got this problem of millions of poor illiterate people who can't contribute to growth because they're not very good in the factories because they're illiterate, so it causes many problems. And these people won't benefit from the growth either, which is sad for them. China and India's growth has been both positive and negative for the UK. So on the bright side, we've got cheaper imports because they're selling cheaper because they can produce cheaper, which helps to control inflation and increase real incomes. And we've also got a larger market for UK exports because incomes in China and India are increasing because their GDP is increasing, so their aggregate demand is increased. So we're trying to supply what they want, which means we've got a greater market. But on the other hand, we've got lots of manufacturing jobs because companies have moved production from the UK to China and India to take advantage of their low labour costs, because everyone's suddenly been like, oh wow, why haven't we been working with them for ages? So everyone's all moved away from us. So we're like the poor kid that gets left out. And there's also been a potential increase in global warming because China uses cheap coal to meet increased electricity demand, which is very bad because it leads to more pollution. And there's also been an increase in cost of raw materials because increased demand from China and India is greater than supply, and when demand is greater than supply, the price rises, which is problematic for everyone worldwide. We're now moving on to protectionism, which is where an action is taken that reduces international trade, so it's basically the opposite of free trade. And there's many reasons why people try to protect their industries using protectionism. One of them is to reduce dumping, which is when firms and countries sell below the cost of production to drive out competition and gain market share before raising the price to make large profits. So countries be like, oh, we don't want that to happen, we're going to protect our industries, so we're not going to be taking in imports from you because you're selling cheaply and you're going to ruin our businesses. So they're like, oh, we're going to protect our industries. So they use protectionism. Then there's also countries that claim they need to develop their industries before they increase efficiency. So they need protection against industries not to grow, and that's called infant industries, new industries are. They also try to protect jobs because if you have foreign goods entering country, it can lead to reduced employment rates because people buy from foreign companies rather than the home companies, so they see reduced demand and therefore have to reduce their employment. Countries may want to prevent negative externalities, so to prevent them from entering the country. For example, there was a UK TSE outbreak, so the French banned the importing of UK meat because they didn't want all their French people or French animals or whatever it is to get TSE, which is like a disease. And there's also political reasons, so I don't know, they might want to protect vital industries or political policy reasons to try to keep their own country good and promote their own economic growth. There's 4 main ways of protecting industries and main methods of protectionism: tariffs, quotas, embargoes and regulations. So tariffs are taxes placed on imports to increase price and reduce demand, because if there's a tax on the product coming into the country, that'll increase the price, and then people are like, oh, we can't afford that anymore, so less people will buy it, and so that'll decrease the imports, which will in turn reduce international trade. A quota is a physical limit on the number of goods imported into a country, so you might say, oh, we're only going to have 50 of Microsoft's computers coming into the country, which is, sucks for everyone else who wants a computer, but it reduces the number of imports, so it saves our own computer companies. An embargo, which is an actual ban on the import of a good or service, so that completely stops it coming into the country, reducing the import of that good completely. But you have to be really careful with that one in an exam, because that's not reducing international trade, that's just stopping it altogether. And then there's regulations, which is how countries try to limit imports through a variety of rules, which are designed to increase manufacturing costs. So I don't know, they might say, we'll only accept printers that have got a red bit of paint on the front, and that'll cost more for the company to produce, so it will therefore increase the price of the imports and reduce the demand in the country, leading to reduced international trade. The main negative result of protectionism is that when one country protects an industry, another country will retaliate by protecting one of its own industries, because it'll be like, well, it's not really fair if you're protecting your industry and I'm not protecting mine. So they'll protect their industry, and it leads to higher prices, low quality and less choice for the consumer, and it'll just spread worldwide, and the benefits of free trade are lost, and there's a dramatic ellipsis at the end of that sentence to emphasise how terrible that point is. So we're moving on now to a question that's stimulated much debate between economists and politicians, and that's, why is the UK in the EU? The EU, or European Union, was set up by the Treaty of Rome on the 25th of March 1957, and it was signed by 6 countries, and I don't think we were one of them, so we were sort of left out there. But now it includes most European countries, and it has 27 members. The European Union operates as a single market, and we'll come on to what that means later, meaning that it's got a common external system of tariffs, so firms in the EU have a larger potential market, so we can trade more, yay, but firms outside the EU find it harder to export their products to here, so they suffer and we benefit. Woo. So a single market means no protectionist measures on trade between member states, so all the countries in the EU can trade with each other with no problems. There's the elimination of border control and free movement of people, so people can move from place to place, job to job, really easily. So we might get a few Polish people over here, might send a few English people out to Poland, well, we can't really send them out, but they might just go there. Then there's the mutual recognition of qualifications, so GCSEs from England will be just as appreciated in France as, the baccalaureate, is that what they have in France? I don't know. Whatever they have in France is appreciated over here. And we also have the same taxes, industrial laws and economic laws, so it's completely fair trade between all the countries within the EU. A single market is when economies of different countries can be treated as one when a firm's considering its domestic market, and there's many advantages and disadvantages of this, which we'll come to later, but it basically means that all the countries in the EU can be treated as one big country when the Americans are thinking about what they want to sell over here. The customs union is a group of countries, such as the EU, which have free trade between member countries but a common external barrier, so we're like, oh, we don't like any of you guys, we're just going to talk amongst ourselves. It's like that really bitchy group of girls in your year that you didn't like, and they were all bitchy, together, bitching with everyone else, and hated everyone else, basically, yeah. That was a really bad example. And single currency is when there's a group of countries which agree to adopt the same currency and have one monetary policy. So they're all working together. There's many advantages and disadvantages of a single market. So specialisation in economies of scale are a massive advantage, because countries gain from all these because they're selling to a large market, because there's, 27 members of the EU that they're selling to. So selling to loads of people, so if you're selling to more people, you can get economies of scale because you're producing more. So that lowers the price for all the consumers. Then there's free movement of capital, so non-EU firms are actually attracted to set up factories in the EU to gain access to the large EU market, which leads to inward investment, and because loads of factories setting up in this country, that leads to increased employment, which is really good for the economy. Then there's free movement of labour, so EU citizens have the right to work in any EU country, so if all jobs in one country are occupied, the workers can just stroll abroad and get a job there. So if there was no workers in this country that we needed for a job, and all the people in Germany don't have jobs because all their jobs are full, they can just come over here and work for us, and we can also get skilled labour from other countries if we don't have enough here. And because it's a larger market, there's more firms operating, so there's much more competition, so all the individual firms improve their productivity and efficiency and hopefully lower the prices as well, which is really good for the consumer, because otherwise underperforming firms lose market share. And finally, there's higher economic growth and standards of living, because the larger market leads to increased need for output and therefore increased need for supply, so increased employment, and that leads to a positive multiplier effect, which is awesome. Unfortunately, there's a few disadvantages of single market. A major one of this is job losses, because increased specialisation of areas leads to job losses in other areas. because production's cheaper in other areas. They sell at a lower price, which drives other firms in other areas out of the market. And there's the increased chance of this with single market, because there's far more areas operating. So that leads to job losses, which is sad. And local firms are often forced out of business because economies of scale allow multinational firms to drive out local firms. So say goodbye to your local, Fred and Peter's bakers. Then there's poorer areas which lose capital and jobs, because countries further from the population centres of the EU tend to lose capital and jobs to countries such as the UK, which is awesome for us, but sucks to be them. And then there's human exploitation, because some countries have got lower minimum wages than others. Manufacturing firms are attracted to the low labour costs of poorer member countries, so countries suffer unemployment, whereas countries like people in other countries are often left to work really hard to get a ridiculously low wage, which is pretty sad for them. So the Eurozone consists of countries who chose to use the euro, and there's a nice picture of the euro there in case you don't know what it looked like. And the euro was introduced on the 1st of January 1999, but there was a bit of a time lag between, introducing it and getting it all running, so the actual notes and coins weren't available till the 1st of January 2002, which was 3 years later. And the European Central Bank was set up, meaning there's a single monetary policy for the Eurozone, so they all work together, which could be really cute or really disastrous. And we have some more advantages and disadvantages, and this time it's of single currency. So the advantage of a single currency eliminates the risks with exchange rates, because firms buy and sell future delivery, and having one currency removes the danger of the value changing before the payment's made, which increases trade. So, for example, Tom's firm wants to buy some bananas from Adrian's firm, and Adrian lives in France, and Tom lives in Germany. And if they had different currencies, Tom might agree to pay a certain amount, but then the exchange rate might change, meaning that he'd be paying much more in value than he intended. So, this having a single currency prevents this from happening. And then there's price transparency, which makes it easier to compare prices and get the best value for money. Because say you're not very good at maths and you know the exchange rate, and you know that speakers here are 13 quid, speakers in France are 13 euros, you've got no idea what that means unless you're able to work it out, so it makes it much easier to compare prices. And then there's transaction costs, because everyone's using the same currency. It means it doesn't have to be changed between member countries, which saves money and increases trade in the long run. And there's also more employment, because people can more easily change the country which they're working in, because the salary is paid in the same currency as they use in their own country. So, say there wasn't enough jobs in Germany, and there was an excess of jobs in France, Germans could easily move to France to work there without having to, struggle with all the changing currencies. And then there's long-term planning, because there's clearer information on input costs and competitors' prices, and this enables improved opportunities for long-term planning. So, say Kavita had a firm in Germany and she's selling to people in France, she can see what her competition's pricing and stuff is much more easily, because it's in the same currency. Because if it was in a different currency, she'd have to keep changing it over, which would get really annoying. And finally, there's a single monetary policy, because the European Central Bank controls inflation across member states by setting a rate of interest. This increases certainty for firms when it comes to borrowing money for investment, because if they borrow it from another country, they know the interest rate will be the same from all the different countries. So that makes it better for them. Unfortunately, there's also disadvantages of the single currency, and a big one of that is that countries lose control, because if they share a single currency, they lose control over their own monetary policy, so they lose the ability to change the rate of interest to suit their needs, because if you remember from Unit 2, monetary policy can be used for many different things. An example of that is employment. So say they want to increase their country's employment, whereas another country wants to tackle inflation, that's conflicting interest, and the European Central Bank will have to just decide that for them, so they lose total control. It's also harder for one big monetary policy to take into account all the small things. So an example of that is sensitivity to interest rates, because most people in the UK have got their own homes, they pay mortgages on them, and that's a big part of their income. But if the European Central Bank decided to put up interest rates, people would have to pay more on their mortgages unless they're fixed, which is really bad for people in the UK who will lose a greater part of their income than people in other countries who maybe don't have mortgages as much. And countries with a shared monetary policy also have a really slow reaction to recessions, so they take much longer to cut their interest rates to stimulate the economy, which is just bad for them. So how is the UK's international trade recorded? The best way of calculating international trade is with the current account, which adds the balance of trade in goods and services to the net investment incomes from overseas assets. So the balance of trade in goods is the export of goods minus the import of goods, and the balance of trade in services is the export of tertiary services minus import of services. And these are really important to see whether we've got a current account deficit or surplus, so we know how well we're trading with other countries. So here's some example of goods that we might trade. So manufactured goods like clothes, semi-finished goods and components like high carbon steel, energy products, energy-saving light bulbs, raw products, iron ore, consumer goods like freezers and fridges, and capital goods like basically machinery, computers, printers, that sort of thing. And then trade and services, we've got banking, insurance, consultancy, arts and culture, tourism, transport and shipping, education and health, and research and development services. Here's some more really important terms. So we have the balance of payments deficit, which is when expenditure is greater than income, which leads to an outflow of money, which is really bad, as can be seen by that sad face. I really don't like using smileys, but I felt it was necessary to emphasise how bad it was. It's not really a smiley though, it's a saddie, but that sounds a bit weird. And then there's a balance of payment surplus, which when income is greater than expenditure, so we're getting an inflow of money, which is really good, hence the massive smiley face. Yay! We're currently in a balance of payments deficit, which is pretty sad for a number of reasons. And the reason we're in this deficit is because we've lost advantage in many industries. So in the past, the UK was really specialised in industries, especially steel production, but these industries have disappeared and they've been replaced by imports because other countries have got absolute advantage, so they can get the steel cheaper. So we're importing instead, which means we're spending more and getting less money in. Then there's globalisation, because it's cheaper to produce goods abroad where labour costs are low. So the goods we used to make in the UK are now made in China, so we have to buy them from China rather than sell them to China, which is pretty depressing. Then there's the growth in people's real incomes, because people in the UK tend to have quite high incomes. They've also got quite high demand, and demand's greater than supply, and the source of goods that are being made in the UK means that we have to import more. So we're importing more, which is obviously bad for the deficit, because it's making it worse. And then we've got quite a strong exchange rate, so UK citizens can afford more foreign goods, whereas UK goods are more expensive abroad, so demand falls, and we'll come to that in much more detail later. And the UK's currently got quite a low level of productivity and investment, which is bad, because other competitors have got higher productivity, so they make more in the same amount of time, so they get more profit in. And we've also got quite low levels of capital investment, which means that we can't make better goods in the future. And we've also got quite low, weak product initiative, which means that we don't spend as much on research and development, so we're not able to increase our productivity and increase more to sell more. So, because we're not making enough for our own country, we have to import more, which is really bad for the deficit. Fortunately, there's many ways we can deal with this balance of payments deficit. A big one is to reduce the exchange rate by cutting interest rates, and therefore lowering the price of UK products abroad. We'll come to that in more detail later. We can also reduce demand by using our two favourite policies, fiscal and monetary, they're back, to raise interest rates and taxes, which reduces the demand for imports, so we're importing less. We can also increase output using another old friend, the supply side policy, to increase productivity, and if we're producing more, we can sell more, and that'll get more money into the country. And we can also reduce inflation using fiscal and monetary policies to make our prices more competitive abroad, so we can sell more. Yay, haha. Moving on again to the importance of the value of the currency, which is one of the things that most people find the hardest to get their heads around. So, I'll try. Exchange rates are how much of one country's currency needs to be given up to buy one unit of another currency. And it'll be given in sort of £1 equals $2 format. But, I mean, that would be quite good exchange rate. Strong. Tough. But it's not that anymore. Used to be. It used to be awesome to go on holidays to America. Just buy everything really cheap. But it's not like that anymore. Pretty depressing. And there's two main types of exchange rate. There's the floating and the fixed. Floating exchange rate is when the prices of two currencies are decided by market forces, so demand and supply, whereas a fixed exchange rate is when the central bank of a country tries to decide the currency price using different methods that we'll come to in a sec. Most countries have a floating exchange rate where the market forces of demand and supply control the exchange rate, and as you can see on the screen we have some lovely demand and supply diagrams. You might recognise them from Unit 1. Exciting. They're quite blurry though, so I don't know if you can actually read them, but I can, haha. First we're going to talk about changes of demand. So if demand of the pound from Americans increased, so for example if loads of Americans came on holiday to England, the graph will shift to the right and the price will increase. So it will go from D1 to D2, which is an extension of the supply curve, and so the price moves up from P1 to P2. Yay. And then if supply of the pound increases, so if foreign holders of the pound lose confidence in the UK economy and more pounds are sold, supply of the pound will increase. And this leads to the graph shifting right from S to S1, and so there's a decrease in the price of the pound from P1 to P2. And then we have the fixed exchange rates, and some countries try to fix their exchange rates. They're like, we're not going to be controlled by you market forces, we're going to fix it ourselves. And there's two main ways of doing this. So we've got India, who doesn't allow its currency to be bought and sold freely, so rupees can only be bought in India, so the supply never changes. So this rate's fixed by the Reserve Bank of India, and so the exchange rate just stays as it is. And China does it differently. They do it through the People's Bank of China, which buys and sells the yuan, or however you pronounce it, yuan? Yuan. Yen? I think it's yen. No, I don't know. In the foreign exchange market to maintain its value at a fixed price. So if demand for the yuan rises, the price will also increase. So the bank would sell yuan, and that doesn't sound right. So yuan. Bank would sell yuan and buy pounds, leading to a rise in the price of the pound and a fall in the price of the yuan, maintaining a steady rate of exchange, if that makes any sense whatsoever. I'll explain it in just really simple words. Increase in demand leads to increase in price. Bank wants to decrease the price, so tries to increase the supply. I would draw it out on some demand supply diagrams, but I'm too lazy. Apologies. Exchange and interest rates are really closely interlinked, because if the interest rate in one country increases, bank deposits in that country become more attractive, so everyone's like, we're going to come to this country, so we can put all our money in, and they put all their money into our country. So people with deposits abroad move money to this country, so they sell their original country and buy the new currency, which is the pound, and this leads to an increase in demand for the new currency, so the price of the new currency rises. So basically, increase in demand leads to increase in price. So the countries that are most often traded are the US dollar, the euro, the yen, and the UK pound. Excuse my awful accents, especially the UK one, that was just offensive. Before we talk about how interest rates and exchange rates affect international competitiveness, we really need to define what it means. So international competitiveness is the ability of companies to compete with companies from other countries, and it's measured by success in selling goods and services. So say one country, sold loads, yay, that's a really internationally competitive country, compared to one that, sold nothing. That's a really uninternationally competitive country, or is it an internationally uncompetitive country? That sounds better. So first we're going to look at how you'd get a decrease in international competitiveness. So say the value of the pound increases because the interest rates increased. UK exports become more expensive to buyers abroad, so it's harder to sell UK goods and services abroad, whereas UK imports are cheaper and foreign companies find it easier to sell products in the UK. So we're importing more and exporting less, which is really bad and leads to an increased current account deficit. And I think there's some, what's its face, to remember it. What's it called when you've got all those letters at the start of the words? What is it? I'm just going to look it up. There's mnemonic, that's the one, mnemonic, haha. The there's a mnemonic to remember this, but I'm not actually sure what it was because I wasn't listening. Mainly because I'm so bad at remembering them. They just don't work with me. But there is one. But I don't know what it is. That was just a really pointless thing to say. And then we have the increase in international competitiveness. So the value of the pound decreases because interest rates have decreased. So UK exports are cheaper to buy abroad, and it's easier to sell UK goods and services abroad. So everyone's like, "Oh, we're going to buy UK exports, wow!" Which brings loads of money into the country. And UK imports are also more expensive, so foreign companies find it harder to sell products in the UK. So it's really good because we're importing less and exporting more, which leads to a decreased current account deficit. Yeah! There's also a mnemonic for this one, and I also don't know it. So we're moving on now to how a country can become more competitive. Competitiveness is the ability of a country to compete successfully internationally and maintain improvements in real output and wealth. So being able to compete successfully internationally means that you're able to export quite a lot and get lots of money into the country, and your exports are at a more competitive price, so they might be cheaper or better quality than other exports, so everyone wants your exports. There's 3 big factors that affect competitiveness: wages, exchange rates, and productivity. There's also 3 not so big factors that affect competitiveness, that are raw materials, government regulation, and keeping up to date. Wages affect competitiveness because countries that have got lower wage levels can produce at a much lower price, so they can therefore pass on this price to the consumer and sell much cheaper, so they can undercut the prices of products from other countries, and then that removes competition. This is dumping, because then they raise their price dramatically and make amazing profits. It's like a really good business move, but it's not so good for the country. Exchange rates play a major role in the competitiveness of a country, and a rise in exchange rates makes UK exports less competitive. But this could be a sort of debated point amongst economists, because UK exports are less competitive because they're more expensive, but imports are cheaper, and because the UK uses imported materials and lots of production, our costs are falling, so this could offset the rise in exchange rates, so competitiveness isn't affected. But it's a confusing point. And the change in exchange rate is also very quick. It immediately affects competitiveness, so it's a really serious issue. And productivity, the rising costs are offset by a greater output for each worker. So say we did have a really strong exchange rate, so our exports were less competitive, but we had amazing productivity, which we don't, but say we did, we're making so many products and selling them cheaper that it might actually just counteract the exchange rate issue, so it might not have a major effect. But productivity is really important, something we really need to work on. Raw materials also affect competitiveness, because countries like the UK, which don't have many raw materials, have to import them, and if the cost of these materials rises, the cost of production increases and makes us less competitive. In an attempt to try to prevent this happening, some countries, like China, buy shares in companies, such as mining companies, to get raw materials at favourable prices. It's quite sneaky, but effective. Then we've got government regulation, and the UK's got really heavy regulation on firms, so to comply with these, firms take time and money that they could spend on production, which makes firms less competitive than firms in less regulated countries who don't have to spend the time and money to keep with the regulations. And finally, keeping up to date affects competitiveness dramatically. And finally, keeping up to date affects competitiveness massively. I mean, keeping up to date is such a vague title, I can't think of a better way to phrase it. But if businesses are, maintaining and improving the workers' skills, this increases productivity, and keeping equipment up to date, it means the costs will be lower over time, even if they cost a bit to start with. And if we've got lower costs, we can sell at a lower price, and therefore we're more competitive. So it's really important. Foreign direct investment is the investment by foreign companies in the production of goods and services in another country. And it's really good to get foreign direct investment because it brings new innovations, capital and technology, and more jobs. You get new innovations because foreign companies bring in their ideas, and foreign companies may also invest in capital and technology. And because we've got the foreign companies investing over here, they're providing jobs, which is pretty good. And the combination of all of these allows the country to increase production and exports, allowing the country to stay competitive, and it's just like amazing. It's the life. And this also leads to a multiplier effect, providing more jobs, because we've got the employment increasing, so increased aggregate demand, more demand needs more supply. To get more supply, we need more jobs. Woo! And the government can increase their chance of getting foreign direct investment by providing subsidies for the foreign companies, by providing cheap labour. So it's not really happening over here, but places like China, everyone's like, ooh, we're going to foreignly direct invest in them because we can like get it cheap labour. And attractive locations, because foreign companies are like, ooh, that looks nice, we're going to go over there. And it's really shallow of them, to be honest, but you know. Aside from getting foreign direct investment, there's a few other things the government can do to increase its country's international competitiveness. So one of them is retaining low inflation, because if we've got inflation that's higher than that of countries we trade with, our exports are really expensive, so they're less likely to buy them. But if we can keep low inflation, our exports are cheap, and so we can sell more abroad. And we can achieve this using, wait for it, the fiscal and monetary policy. Woo! If we sustain economic growth, this also keeps living standards and employment levels competitively high. So it means the government has to spend less on paying benefits and stuff. And if we're spending less on benefits, we can spend more in other areas, such as subsidies for firms to increase their productivity and stuff. And it can be achieved using all three of the policies, actually, fiscal, monetary and supply side. Woo! The government can also invest in education and training to increase productivity and ensure that everyone's able to assist the economy. And if we're providing good quality free education and training, then that should help to increase education and training. If we've got the higher productivity, we're making more, outputs greater, sell more, exports greater, reduce balance payment deficit. Pretty good. And we're also more competitive. That too. So how successful have the government policies actually been? I think they've been quite successful because the UK's international competitiveness has risen, and the UK has the largest inflow of FDI in the EU, which makes UK products more competitive. But on the other hand, all the UK interest rates and monetary policy has been targeted at reducing inflation, so we've increased the interest rates to reduce spending, leading to an increased value of the pound, leading to an increased exchange rate, making us less competitive, so the balance of payments deficit is increased, which is depressing. And the UK is also pretty pathetic. We've got such a low productivity. It's lower than our competitors, so it means we're less competitive. So what are the benefits of globalisation to the UK? We've got low inflation due to the ability to produce in low-cost countries, so we're reducing our costs, so the prices aren't going up as much. We've got sustained economic growth because we've got rising levels of investment in trade, so it means that our output's just increasing because we need to increase it to export more. We're getting high levels of foreign direct investment because companies are moving their factories overseas and over here because we've got such amazing skilled, beautiful workers. We've got rising productivity because foreign companies are producing in the UK, bringing new methods and ideas. London is the world financial centre, which is pretty awesome, providing high levels of employment and a great inflow of money. Money. Globalisation also helps UK companies to sell abroad because our Britishness is attractive to foreigners, even if it isn't attractive to ourselves. They don't know about the other half. That sounds so snobby. Standard of living's increased because we're selling abroad, increasing our inflow of money, and the government gets more money in tax. So greedy, taking it off us all. But they are spending it on us, they're spending it on education and health, so our standard of living's actually increasing. Government not so greedy. We've also got the advantage of the internet language because most of the internet operates in English, so it's easier for UK companies to develop online services. So we're actually taking advantage of this globalisation with our amazing English. We've also got a wide range of products to the consumers because foreign companies are selling abroad and they're selling over here. So we're getting all these new products that we wouldn't be able to buy if there wasn't globalisation. And there's also a reduction in the shortage of skilled labour due to the international labour migration because everyone's like coming over here because they've seen how good we are. And so we've got more skills, which is pretty awesome. Unfortunately, there's a few costs of globalisation to the UK. A massive one is the loss of jobs, because the UK's got a minimum wage, which increases production costs. So firms are moving production abroad, because they're able to do this now due to globalisation. The UK is also vulnerable to risks abroad, because crises abroad have a larger impact on the UK due to international interdependence, all dependent on each other, and if one country, like, all their cows died, we can't get the beef from them anymore. Sad. That's such a pathetic example. We've also got the loss of manufacturing industry, because production is cheaper abroad, so firms are moving their factories abroad, so we're losing all our manufacturing, which is well depressing because that's our culture. We've also got more competition from foreign countries, which is bad for smaller firms and businesses who are going to struggle to establish themselves. And FDI does not prevent firms from moving, because if demand falls, these firms will relocate and we will lose them, and all the employment and all the amazing machinery they brought us, it'll just go like it never meant anything. And environmental problems, because the transport of goods worldwide leads to pollution, and tourism increases, leading to pollution. There's more increased packaging, so we have to transport stuff further, so we need to package it up better. It's just bad, loads of pollution, awful for the environment, deaths of animals, it's just tragic. Join the eco team. Nice long title here for the penultimate section, which is why less developed countries struggle to achieve growth and benefit from international trade. So there's two main types of poverty. Absolute poverty, which is when you've got insufficient income to live on and thus not being able to afford basic essentials such as food, clothing and shelter. And on a world basis, this is defined as living on less than $1.25 a day, but this figure changes over time. And in developed countries, few people are in absolute poverty, as the state provides the bare necessities. Sorry, that's my warped sense of humour there. And then there's relative poverty, which is when you're not in absolute poverty, but you're not able to enjoy what many people see as essential. And in the EU, we consider relative poverty to be having less than 60% of the median income. And the UK's got one of the higher rates of relative poverty in the EU, which is very bad indeed. So what does the UK do to try to reduce poverty? We've got a national minimum wage, which reduces the number of people on low incomes and ensures that all workers have enough money to buy the essentials. Unemployment benefits, so that all adults in the UK have got enough to buy the essentials. Child benefits, so ensure that all parents on lower wages can provide for their children, so that no children are left in poverty. And the state pension, which ensures that pensioners can afford the essentials, because if they haven't worked or something, they might not get a pension otherwise. And all of these policies have helped to reduce poverty, which is amazing. But unfortunately, it's harder to reduce poverty in certain groups, such as the disabled. Luckily, absolute poverty has declined slightly in the past few years, but there's still many people living in absolute poverty, with large groups in many countries remaining socially excluded. And there's three main types of poverty maintained by inequalities in power. So there's political poverty, when wealthier people in power set agendas and laws and stuff to ensure that the wealth gap remains and they stay rich. Economic poverty, when employers take the majority of profits and pay their workers really badly. And social and cultural poverty, when some groups are just completely excluded and not employed, leaving them in poverty. This can be to do with like racism or gender or stuff like that. Sadly, there's many limits to benefiting from globalisation, such as poor education and training in less economically developed countries, which reduces productivity and so lowers exports. And there's also less innovation for development to reduce cost of production, because these educated people find it harder to be innovative. The poor healthcare means there's lower life expectancy, so there's less workers, and high infant mortality, so people die before they can actually work, which is bad for the economy and for the dead person. There's a lack of investment, which prevents countries from trialling methods and getting better ideas, and countries can't afford training or machinery to increase productivity, so it means they can't sell as much and export as much, which is bad. There's a high foreign debt, so the government actually has to give loads of money away to repay the debts, and the government ends up paying a lot of money in interest as well, so less money is spent on investment in new technology, and productivity levels stay low and production's reduced, which is just sad. And there's also civil wars and corruption, so only some people benefit from globalisation, and richer people prevent poorer people from benefiting, so the poor people tend to stay poor, whilst the rich people just get richer and richer. And this is the last section, so what measures are used to support growth in less developed countries? The two main methods of supporting growth are aid and trade. We can look at aid first, which is a voluntary transfer of resources from one country to another, and it can be given in a number of ways, so money, machinery and people with specialist skills, and this will work to increase productivity, and it can also be given directly to people who need it, rather than just the government who might take it away. But aid given as loans can lead to debt interest, which is really bad, and it often targets only small specific groups of people, so that's also bad, because other people may still be in poverty. And infrastructure products tend to benefit employers more than workers, so aid doesn't actually reach the people who need it most, because the employers benefit because they can transport their stuff better and sell it out, but the workers don't benefit because they're just stuck on this horrible low wage. Then we have trade, which is the exchange of goods and services between countries. And trading with less developed countries allows them to grow their way out of poverty. And trade also increases employment levels, which leads to a better quality of life. And trade allows countries to fully use their resources, so they're not wasting any resources. Unfortunately, poor countries struggle to compete in the world market because they lack the advantages of rich countries, meaning they can't take the full advantage of trade, because maybe they've got worse communications or transport or stuff. So they don't benefit as much as other countries. But put with aid, so a mixture of trade and aid, allows a country to grow without suffering the many negatives of using just one of the methods to support growth. Woo woo! Investment is another way to support growth. So rich countries can invest in a country's resources, so investing in human capital ensures that workers are healthy, increases their productivity, and increases the country's exports, making them more competitive so they can grow. And there's also investment in machinery, which enables productivity to increase, increasing countries' exports, again and again and again. There's also foreign direct investment, and multinational corporations can set up in a country which provides employment, which is really good, less poverty, woohoo! But unfortunately investment can fall if countries become over-reliant on the invested capital, which means they're back to square one. Debt relief programs are a really effective way of supporting growth. In the past, poorer countries borrowed heavily, and so they've now got massive debts to rich countries, which means they have to use a large proportion of their export earnings to repay the debts, so it limits the country's development because they can't spend it on training, education, better machinery, that sort of thing. But rich countries can cancel or cut debts, and this will mean that the export money can be used for sustainable development and to reduce poverty. So that'd be really good for the poor country, but I guess the rich country might miss out a bit, Sad for them, good for the poor people. And then we have the non-government organisations, or NGOs. And I've looked around quite a bit on lots of websites. This all seems very washy what the actual definition is, but I've sort of made one up which sort of fits, and that's a non-profit organisation or charity with a variety of aims, most of which are social. They're not connected to the government, and they often focus only on a particular problem, so they only help small groups of people rather than everyone in general. So their overall impact within a country can often be very small in comparison to the work of governmental bodies. So that's just a bit sad for the people that aren't benefiting. And an example of a non-government organisation is Oxfam. And that is the whole of Unit 3 Economics in a video. And I've got a really sore throat, and you've probably got a really bad headache if you've actually managed to get here, which you probably haven't. But if anyone actually does get here, I'm sorry for my horrible voice, and you've had to listen to it. But, woo, good luck in the exam. Awesome.